concerning a particularly important component of the downtown revitalization program. My name is Bill Geary. I'm a special counsel to the mayor in charge of downtown development. And we also have other members of the city team who are involved with that. Our Deputy Director of Planning, Rob Stevens.
He's upstairs.
He's upstairs, okay.
Yeah,
we have a number of consultants, several of whom you'll hear from. But I thought it would be helpful, and I know I recognize a number of you from the merchants meeting that we had about a week or so ago at the Fours to brief the merchants who rely upon the Hancock lot for their parking purposes, either for themselves or their employees or customers, as the case may be. The process that we're beginning now, and this has been a multi-year process for those of you who have been in the city for a while, each has a phase that leads to the next phase. And I'm going to give you just a brief background of how we got to where we are now. And it relates to several of the planning phases that occurred over the course of the last few years. And last year at this time, both related to work that we needed to do, and we've all suffered through the infrastructure work that has to occur in an old city where you're dealing with infrastructure that's over 100 years old. And during the course of the last number of years, whether it be relocating portions of the town brook, relocating miles of water, sewer, and drainage lines, working with utilities to relocate their utility lines, their electric lines, their gas lines, cable lines, and the like. It has been a complicated mix, and most of that work has to occur first, but it has been occurring. Now we're getting to the point where we're in the process of having approved two proposed developments. Both of them are residential developments, and they are predicated on the need for us to look at another important part of the city's infrastructure, and that's its parking capacity, particularly for a business community that relies upon that parking, as I said, for their customers and their employees. And we're at the point where within the next 6 months, we want to start that construction. It, of course, also has its associated infrastructure work that will have to occur before we start that construction. Water, sewer, and drain lines that will need to be relocated out of Cottage Street onto Dennis Ryan Parkway. Unfortunately, for those of you who are on Cottage Street, it is a main corridor, if you will. It has been a main corridor for most of the utility lines that over the course of the last 100 years were built to provide utility services to the downtown area. So last year we appeared before the Quincy City Council, and we requested an appropriation to begin preliminary design of a parking garage and to determine what its size and capacity would be, how big it would be in terms of height, and how it would be serviced in terms of access and egress. Over the course of the last year, we've been working on that preliminary design with a firm called Desmond Associates, which is a nationally renowned consultant engineering firm that is in the business and specializes in designing garages for a variety of purposes. Also, as you know, last spring, we took down the remnants of an old decayed garage, the Ross garage, and although it had one time, the portion of it had a capacity of 670 vehicles for the last number of years before it was demolished last June, by June 30. Most of that parking capacity was unused because of its poor condition and a variety of other problems that afflict municipal garages and urban garages. So with the lessons of how that garage and other urban garages have turned out to be liabilities rather than assets, we have been engaged in a design and planning process to attempt to ensure that those mistakes of the past weren't repeated. That we wanted a garage that was not only going to serve the utilitarian needs of the downtown area and reinforce our goal of rebuilding downtown Quincy as an economic engine for the city and its citizens. That's what we're hoping you will see this evening as we bring to you what is now closer to a final design. And as one of our presenters will describe, we did look at a number of options as to the construction type for the garage, as to the design of the garage, as to its access and egress. So let me show you just a brief overview of the area in question. This is the proposed garage. This is what we all refer to as LBC, which had originally been proposed as a hotel, but will now be a 171-unit apartment complex with the option for some of those, 35 of those units in the future to be converted to hotel units for principally long stays. As those of you who are business people in that area know that they operate the Nova Suites Hotel currently. Incidentally, that building has attached to it what is an atrium that will be owned by the city, because one of the utility lines, or let me say one of the infrastructure components that is being relocated is a drain line, a culvert that's going to the town brook, and it will be under that. It needs to be relocated from here. It will be located under that, but we also wanted to create an attractive connection, pedestrian connection, from Hancock Street into what will be a new civic space, and you'll see a bit more of that as we go through this. And then, of course, there's the O'Connell Apartments, 100 and, how many units? 124 units, and there's future potential development parcels on either side. Is Revere Road, Hannon Parkway, Dennis Ryan Parkway, and of course the courthouse. Here's another view of the various improvements now focused on the drain lines, the one that I just told you about here, the ones that are over here by Cottage Street that are going to be relocated to Dennis Ryan Parkway. Once again, access, egress to and from the garage. Our consultant will get into a little more detail. Here's a three-dimensional view, which we've shown over the course of the last year or so. Now, once again, the final architecture of this garage won't look that way. It's just designed to show you what its size and massing will be. And one of our presenters this evening will present to you what the proposed facade will look like. We were very anxious, the mayor particularly, along with Mr. O'Connell, to ensure that it looked less like a garage and more like a building, that it fits into the context of a revitalized downtown, and that it is an attractive component for attracting people to a new destination, a new civic space that will be constructed in front of it. Here's another three-dimensional view. Shows the access egress roads, including the new road that will be an extension of Clifton Street, where the project is going on over there, the Galvin project, so that it will provide direct access from Galvin Street. You should also be aware of the fact that there's another transportation component to this. On the other side of the Ross lot, a new bridge is going to be constructed by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts from Bergen Parkway into the Ross area, and therefore will continue straight across into the garage, access egress from Revere Road, and access from Cottage Street. Cottage Street will be newly widened at that space there, and in addition to access egress, there'll be a park on the corner. These, once again, these were representative drawings simply to show you the size of the building as distinguished from what it's going to look like architecturally. And I believe this one is on the Revere Road side. This is a rendering initially of the public space that will be created. Below this public space will be a portion of the garage. There'll be one floor that is subterranean, and the park will be built on top of it. This is that access road that I mentioned coming in off of Cottage Street. Street furniture, plantings, and all of those elements are yet to be determined. We want those elements to help enliven the place. We want it to be a destination. We don't want it to be deserted at night or during the day. We want it to attract people, both for not only the residences, but also for the businesses that surround this area. This is looking from, what I'll say, from coming in off Ryan Parkway next to the O'Connell building, looking toward the LBC building. That glass there is a portion of that atrium that I referenced, coming in from Hancock Street. Here's another variable of that, looking from LBC as you would emerge from the atrium, heading toward the O'Connell Tower in the distance. Here's our team who are going to be presenting. Andy Hill will be presenting the parking and demand study, which was the study that the city conducted to determine what the parking demand is and what its supply is, and what we need to do over the course of this process and the construction period to provide adequate parking for the demand that we can document. Mr. Wes Wilson from Desmond, the firm that I've mentioned, will give you a tutorial on the structure and construction of the garage. Ms. Chartugias is the architect who started designing the exterior facade of the garage itself and some of its what I'll call furniture elements in terms of the furnishings in the civic space, what types of activities would be accommodated in the civic space. Finally, a traffic analysis by Mr. Mosley of Stantec to describe their analysis predicated on studies that they've done the last couple of years on volumes of traffic and their analysis of certain intersections where traffic may be stressed as a result of the development that's occurring. So, and of course, at the conclusion, question and answer period for you to ask questions, make comments, and all of us will be available for that purpose when we get to that point. So with that, I'm going to ask Andrew Hill, who did the demand, parking and demand study, to step forward. Sure.
Our journey started about 2 years ago. I was actually reviewing the work that we had done that was foundational to this, and we started in the summer of 2015, almost 2 years to the day. This was a study area that we were looking at, this 5-block area right here. And we wanted to focus on what the existing conditions were in place at the time, and then model out going forward the changes that were going to be happening across the area to identify what the needs were going to be in certain different benchmarks here. Reason that we do this type of methodology is because we are using a shared parking approach when we model out demand or impact. This is a little bit different from your standard zoning approach, which basically adds up the needs of an associated project according to a fixed value, adds them all up together and says, okay, you have a project that's made up of this, this, and this. These are corresponding requirements for zoning, and it adds up to this type of demand. Shared parking is a little bit different because it is based on an empirical model. Folks like me have gone out into the field and counted cars at land uses all over the country at different times of the day, different times of the week, different times of the year, and established what the relationship of parking is to each one of those land uses. It's usually expressed as a demand ratio. The important thing for you to know is that it is based on actual living, breathing land uses here. So when we develop this model, we start projecting forward. We're starting off with something that is not conceptual in nature, but is actual in nature. And it results in a more accurate depiction of what a downtown area might operate like and look like going forward. The 5 benchmarks we looked at were first looking at the area as it currently existed, assuming that it was up at full occupancy. When we did our initial survey work here, there were segments of the area, more specifically office, that were running up to 19% vacancy rate. Doesn't necessarily mean that today the entire downtown is fully leased and occupied, but we do this in an abundance of conservatism to make sure that we're presenting the most conservative projections going forward as we're advising. Second benchmark sort of brings us up to current day. The Ross Garage, which was up and semi-operating in 2015, is down and gone. It's been replaced by a couple of different surface lots. The city has also acquired a couple of parcels and converted that to additional surface parking as well. So that 670 space loss when the Ross Garage came down has been mitigated by the capacity within these facilities, which is just a tick under 400 spaces. West and Chestnut is scheduled to open later this fall, and that is part of this benchmark as well. So when we model that out, we're modeling that out with West and Chestnut, opening up and the impact and the demand that's coming into the area associated with that.
Excuse me, Fred, I have to just correct, that was a typo. West of Chestnut is open and online.
Oh, okay.
Yes, it opened in the late summer, early fall of 2016.
2016. The next benchmark that we looked at is the Hancock lot is about to encounter a partial closure and start preparing for the LBC development and also start to work through some of those utility issues that Bill had mentioned earlier. When that happens, that 442 space lot is going to go down by about 150 spaces, and we wanted to evaluate that impact as well across the area and figure out what that translated into. The next benchmark is the complete closure of the lot here to make way for new development, specifically the garage. There are a number of things that are in place in order to support that, including arrangements to mitigate that by opening up supply in public facilities elsewhere within the area and just outside of the area to mitigate whatever displacement might occur there. At the same time that lot is closing, quite a bit of space, place is opening. And then the last benchmark that we looked at is when the Hancock garage opens at 720, 730 spaces, and LBC and Chestnut Place open, what do we look like at that point? And that gives us a platform to then start looking forward to the development of Ross lots later on. This was a basic program that we were given to analyze and talk about today at this point in the game. And what this translated into is a series of projections going forward. I know this looks very busy, so I'll try to make it as simple as possible. Anywhere you see a blue bar, that is planned parking supply, one of these benchmarks. The benchmarks being the achievable occupancy, the benchmark for the loss of the Ross garage, basically current conditions right now, and West Chestnut coming online. This benchmark right here is the partial loss of the supply in the Hancock lot. That's why you see us go from 2542 down to 2392 here. Benchmark 3 is the complete loss of the Hancock lot. Benchmark 4 is the opening of the garage. And essentially, as you look along this, as you're looking at the green bars, those are representing peak projected demand on a weekday. As you're looking at the red bars, those are representing peak projected demand on the weekend. And for the most part, we've got good balance going. The blue bars are almost always taller than the other colored bars, with the exception of benchmark 3, which is when that Hancock lot goes offline. That is the point in time where the city's going to need to look at doing some mitigation measures outside of that 5-block area to recover the loss of that capacity for that 16 to 18 month period until the garage opens. This is looking at the entire development and the entire project from kind of an apples to apples perspective, looking at total supply and total demand. One of the other things we did was we looked at private demand and private supply relative to public demand and public supply. And the reason that we looked at this is because it is very rare that a public need can advance into a private supply in order to meet its needs. But it is not unusual for private demand to exceed some of its supply and have to fall into the public supply in order to make the difference. This is not necessarily an issue that you're looking at whether there are enough spaces to go around. This is an issue of policy. So as we're advising the city, one of the things that we're looking at is how that balance of public supply and public demand plays out through these different benchmarks. What you can see when we are starting off at full occupancy and then going through the first benchmark up to current conditions is we have pretty good balance between public supply and public demand, private supply and private. Public supply is represented by the blue bars. Private supply is represented by the red bars. The demand, corresponding demand, is right next to it in each case. Your blue and your red bars are exceeding the levels measured by the green and the yellow bars, respectively. Where we start to get into a slight imbalance is here at benchmark 2. Again, that's the loss of 150 spaces that are in Hancock lot that are about to be displaced. At that point, we're looking at a slight imbalance of about 30 spaces. Again, this is a place where we need to work with the city to work through some of these policy issues to identify how we can change these dynamics so that we're, once again, balanced between what the actual need is and what the supply is. This, again, is further exacerbated by the loss of the rest of the capacity in Hancock lot through construction. And then we come to benchmark 4, which is when the garage opens up. We have 730 spaces that are opening up. This is a very conservative projection because there are 2 potential covenants on that garage when it opens up. One of them is 130 space allocation toward the LBC company. And if that comes to fruition, or when that comes to fruition, those spaces are actually showing up over here in this supply. Because in a sense, we've taken spaces that are a public asset and dedicated them to a private use. The other one is on a conservative basis, we've assumed up to 150 space allocation to Clydeman place. What I am told at this point is that that is actually a 50 space allocation subject to review. So this is a hyper-conservative perspective, but even from this hyper-conservative perspective, we're fairly close to having balance as well going forward. This was done essentially to test that planned capacity for 730 spaces, and as we test through, we found that this is, for the most part, adequate from a whole number standpoint. It should be adequate from a policy standpoint, subject to some reviews of policies and commitments.
Everybody will be available for questions at the conclusion. Wes?
Sure. Great, thanks, Andy. So now we know how big the garage needs to be. That's what Andy tells me. So he says we have to build a garage that needs capacity. It needs to be X size. We need to have this many parking spaces. And that's when I've been taught that I'm working with the city. It's where are we planting this garage and what's it going to look like and what are some of the impacts? You know, everything from height, size, width, the mass. It all comes into play working with the numbers. So we have a set goal that we're working to. There's a lot of objectives that come into play. And as Bill indicated earlier, the garage, where we're at today with the plan, I think it has a lot of balances in it. And one of them that he talked about is, you know, we have a below grade portion of the parking garage right here. And what that does is it helps us enable to minimize the mass of this garage. These parking spaces below grade come at a premium, a little bit more expensive, but they also serve a very valuable, I think, they meet one of the objectives of this project of trying to minimize the mass of this garage. Because parking structures themselves are relatively large structures. What we've done here is the grade portion that you see in here is the superstructure of the garage. The frontage here is off of Revere, is off of Revere Road. There's the two access points that you see here. There's this one coming off of Revere Road, coming in off of Dennis, Warren Parkway, Cottage Ave, and then we have another access point here. The garage is a 3-bay, single-threaded helix garage. And so this garage actually goes all the way down to the basement, but once you get into the basement, the dotted line is the actual outline of that garage right now. There's still a discussion about, you know, who's going to park where the public parking spaces are going to be. But also what I want to point out is this amenity space that, or civic space that Bill was talking about. Cheryl's going to talk a little bit more about that in detail. But we are providing some, office areas and support offices, restrooms, public restrooms, and things of that nature within the garage to support that space. So this is the general footprint of the garage as we've laid it down within the space. And one of the things that we have to keep in mind is the lengths of the ramps, because typically a garage is 11 feet floor to floor. So we want to make sure that we get the traffic circulation up and through the garage, but also maximize the parking by parking on those ramps. And also keep the garage as short in both directions as possible. So it's a balance, is basically what we're trying to do. Is we're trying to balance all these needs and all these demands. But at the same time, looking at these ramps, each ramp, we want to make sure it's not too steep, you know? But at the same time, we have to be able to get high enough so we have the proper clearance of the right size vehicles in the garage. And that's how we ultimately ended up with the footprint of the garage that you're seeing right here. We broke it down right now. The garage has a basement, grade, and then 5 more levels of parking on top of that. We're at 730 parking spaces. It sounds like a lot, but one thing when you think about a parking garage is we actually park on the roof. So the roof level is really not a story. And that's what I want to talk about here. On this elevation right here, this is going to be the Revere Parkway elevation. So above this we have 1, 2, 3, only 4 stories. And we actually put the higher 4th story on the back side of the garage, basically towards the civic space facing the floors. What kind of parking structures is going to be? We actually looked at a couple different types of parking structures. Long span construction is the best type of construction. So you're not parking between columns and things like that. So nice wide open parking structure. You have good clear sight lines and things like that. We've looked at post tension, which is a cast in place. It takes a lot longer cycle, but we also looked at precast. And this is examples of precast parking structures right here going up. The construction lends itself very nice, especially up here in the New England area. What we do is, as the foundation is being built, the superstructure, all the little pieces are being built off-site. They're being built and stored in the plant. And once the foundation is done, they come in and then they start erecting all the pieces that have already been fabricated. They start erecting like an erector set, literally. They start bringing them in one piece at a time. So you're going to see a lot of activity, a fence going up there. There's going to be a lot of work going on the site for quite some time. And if you don't drive by and all of a sudden you come by 3 weeks later, boom, there's the project. It's like, wow, how did that happen? This is basically one of the advantages of precast is you really accelerate that construction schedule. And it minimizes some of the parking mitigation that we have to deal with. And so we're trying to compress the schedule as much as possible. That's another one of the benefits of precast. Also, what Cheryl's going to talk about a little bit more, and this picture really doesn't do it justice, is precast lends itself to a lot of architectural amenities. There's a lot of things that you can do with precast. You can mold pieces, you can make different sizes, you can put different types of materials on the face of precast and things like that. But ultimately, at the end of the day, these are all structural pieces. As you can see here, there's different jointing. This one here actually has some brick on it, and you kind of get a rough idea about how the construction looks like that. So that, in a nutshell, is pretty much the structure that we're looking at. So it's going to go one level. We're going to go one level below grade. We're going to have a grade level, and then we're going to go up in a single-threaded helix manner parking garage as we go up. It might be a little difficult to see, but we average approximately about 120 to 130 parking spaces per level. Grade level is a little bit less because we're missing a partial pavement. Here's a section through the garage. With this would be the Ryan Parkway over here, and then this would actually be grade. And this is kind of a little deceiving, but this grade would continue on. You have the forest building right over here, so you can see how we maintain the lower elevation here along the Ryan Parkway. And we only have the 4 stories, even though cars are going to be parking up here on this level here. And then what you're seeing here, this is a wall. It's a structural component we use to help for lateral stability of the parking structure. And cars come through, they circulate in bay turning bays here and up along these gentle parking on ramps. And kind of give you an idea, we're at 228 feet in the long direction and approximately about 180 feet in the short direction. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Cheryl Tagaz. Cheryl is one of the principals at Small Business Guys Architects. She's going to walk you through a little bit about the architecture.
Thank you, Wes. Good evening, everyone. So Wes talked about the scale of the garage, and my job is to make the scale of the building fit into the urban context and to give it character that would be appropriate for its location in the heart of the city. So this slide shows the area as it will be built out eventually. The parcel that's, the 2 parcels that are currently being planned now, being this one, the O'Connell, and this one, I think, LBC. Oops, I'm sorry about that. I didn't.
If you want to lower the end.
How did I do that? Okay, so, and then this is the existing addition, and then these are existing buildings here as well. So one of the things that's important here is that the building is, given its urban context, it is close to the other buildings, and we want to be mindful of that with how we break down the scale, but also how we address where people are coming from. So by a car off of Cottage Street here, it would be entering into the garage there. But meanwhile, pedestrians also could be coming this way from Chestnut Street. And then from Hancock here through the atrium that Bill mentioned before. And then vehicles also coming in through this extension through here, and then also through Revere Street. So there's a lot of points at which people are coming and going, either in their cars or as a pedestrian, and we want the scale of the building to reflect that. So in this plaza space, we can have smaller structures, and we can also provide for sort of pop-up kinds of activities, such as farmers market and retail. So the downtown Quincy has incredible historic structures. They employ materials that have some verticality and some texture and color differences that I felt could be inspiration for the garage itself. And so in looking at how to break the building down, where garages can be very horizontal in their structure, we want the wall panels to actually break the scale down vertically as well. So we get this pattern of breaking the sort of longer facade down into something similar to the way these facades are broken down by vertical elements. And then we want to also make the garage inviting for a user as a, so that the stair has glass and glazing so that it is not only conducive to be used for our exercise, but also for a safety feature so that you can see in and out of the garage. And then here you can see some of this activity that could spill out into the plaza. This is also from the atrium where activity would be coming this way. Some of the way, I mean, we won't be using the granite and brownstone that are used in the historic buildings, but as Wes said, we can do things with the precast that can provide us with a nice architectural feature. This garage is also precast, and it has inlays of brick, and it uses these vertical wall panels, which is similar to what we're proposing to do here. This one is more using the precast with a kind of a limestone look to it in terms of the color. There can be reveals and scoring to again give it a little bit more detail. Then at the pedestrian level, one of the things I should mention is that for natural ventilation, we need to have a certain amount of openness in the garage, so it can't all be solid. So where we're having sort of punched openings, but they won't have glass in them. And we also do need to employ some horizontal so that we can get enough open air. But at the grade level, we wanted to kind of not be looking through at headlights and cars. So we want to employ this kind of a green screen and then the trees so that what we have is a greenscape kind of border. So the garage is set back far enough from the street to allow us to fit those kinds of elements in. And then on the plaza spaces, again, we would be employing different kinds of materials and textures on the plaza surface, but allowing such that you could bring a food truck in, or you could bring a bike vehicle in, which could coffee bike, there's the downtown Boston here, bring farmers market, as has been on the Hancock lot in the past. We could also develop more of a permanent structure for part of it, like here, where that could incorporate built-in seating. With that, I will turn it over to Fred, I believe, unless we'll go back to the thing.
We'll see if I can operate this thing.
I know, it's very sensitive.
There we go. Okay, good. My scope of work on the project was basically to evaluate the traffic operations associated with the proposed garage. Basically, the conditions we looked at were the existing conditions, which we did counts in December of 2016, so with the existing Hancock line in place. Then we looked in the future, what we call 2020 no build. That's a condition that would represent the garage isn't completed. It's just a future condition with the Hancock block still in place. It assumes some development downtown associated with the redevelopment and just some general growth in the area. And for a comparison with it, so we've got a no-build condition. So what are the conditions like when the garage is in place? That's the 2020 interim build. It assumes 40% of the proposed development downtown is completed, and some of the additional roadway improvements in Adams Green, which is basically finished, the Clapham Street extension as part of the roadway network. And then the final piece we looked at is we call the 2022 final build. That assumes a full build-out downtown and all the roadway infrastructure associated with the downtown redevelopment. Real quick, the study area we looked at a series of 8 intersections around the site, bounded here on the east by Revere Road, Cottage Ave to the left. The top is Dennis Ryan Parkway, and down below is Hancock Street. Again, we looked at 8 intersections. And really what drives the whole thing is like how much traffic is going in and out of the garage or the existing lot. So this graphic here, again, we looked at the morning peak hour and the evening peak hour. So on the left here, the blue rectangle shows we have 142 vehicles we count going in and out of the existing lot today. The evening peak hour is 263. So if we look at the interim build case 2020 with the parking lot in place, we're looking at 223 cars entering and exiting in the morning, and a total of 379 in the PM peak hour. And then our full build scenario, again, full redevelopment downtown, approximately 350 vehicles coming in and out of the garage in the morning peak hour, and 520 in the evening. So what does that really mean as far as operations around the study area here? So here's a graphic, and what we did, we just tried to graphically depict what the operations are. So the legend here, we grade operations, we do a letter grade almost like back to school, A through F. Level service, A through C, are considered acceptable conditions. We've highlighted those in green. Traffic's flowing fairly freely, no delays. Level service D&E, that's where we get to the range from acceptable conditions. You start to approach capacity, things are starting to break down a little bit. I will note, level service D is considered acceptable for peak hour conditions in an urban environment. And then finally, level service F, which we're showing in the red dot, that's essentially failure conditions for intersections. The volumes trying to get through the intersection is at or above the capacity of the intersection of the process. When you look at these little bars here, real quick, going from left to right, that's the existing condition. That's the future no build. Basically 2020, the garage is not in place with the traffic. There's been some development downtown. The third dot here, that's the future build condition with the garage in place, again, partially development downtown. And this far, this last symbol on the right, that represents the garage completed, full development downtown. So that's basically the peak condition coming in and out of the garage when it's completed. And as you can see here, there's really not much of an impact. This is the AM peak hour. Not much of a change from existing to the future build. And I'll say that the far right symbol depicts infrastructure improvements in place. So there are some lane additions proposed as part of the development downtown, left turn lanes down in Hancock Parkway, Revere Road, some signal improvements, also up at the Brown Highway, Revere Road as well too. So in the future conditions, a couple left turn lanes added, and as you can see, from existing to the full build, there's minimal changes in operation, basically everything's acceptable. And just a real summary, trip generation expecting when everything's full build, an additional 200 cars in the morning peak hour, 250 in the evening peak hour to enter and exit the garage, existing. Operations for the most part on signalized intersections, where we'll see look better. The same thing with the signalized intersections. At worst, we have one location that's an overall level of service deep, everything else you see today. And finally, the biggest thing here is that construction of the garage, mitigation that's proposed as part of the downtown revitalization is adequate to handle the garage when it's completed. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Bill.
Thank you very much. Fred, would you go back a slide?
Sure.
Did your analysis include the new bridge?
Yes, it did. Yes. So we have the Clyde Street extension, and we assume traffic conversions associated with
Great. Thank you. And if you may have noticed in the last slide on mitigation, we know we have a problem here at this intersection of Hancock Parkway and Hancock Street, and we will be taking measures to mitigate that as soon as possible. With that, I'll just add that one of the things that Wes emphasized in his presentation is that in considering the design and construction of this facility, we very much were focused on having it in operation as quickly as possible and minimizing disruption as much as one can humanly minimize disruption. And early in the game last year, when I first became involved, we looked at particularly construction. We looked at design build. And we knew that we would have 3 facilities that would be under construction simultaneously. The LBC facility, the O'Connell facility, and of course the centerpiece, the garage. And we looked at how we could do that most efficiently, effectively, both cost effectively, as well as logistically effectively. And we decided that it made sense that the same contractors that were going to build the O'Connell project and build the LBC project would also be responsible for building the public improvements, including the garage. So we do have a representative here receiving from the Kennedy Company, and where they will be building the garage along with the O'Connell building, so that we know, working with them and the developer as well, how best to phase this construction to get the garage online as expeditiously as possible, and to avoid what happens at busy construction sites where you get a host of different contractors competing for laydown space, for access, egress. So our plan was to minimize that as much as possible. Likewise, on the LBC property, the contractor that's building their building will be building the relocated culvert beneath, currently beneath the building, but will be rerouted into this new atrium that described.